Well, hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our presentation of reliable audio over unreliable networks. Thanks for being here. And we're going to get our presentation ready to go. If you have any questions, you can either compose them in an email and send them to derek@synthax.com, or you can, for those of you that are on the Zoom side of things, you can send me a chat. I'm just getting everything set up here and we'll get going. All right. So we're going to be talking today about audio codec technology, specifically reliable audio, doing reliable audio over unreliable networks. And in order to do that, we're going to talk a little bit about some technology solutions that you may not be aware of. But first and foremost, who's the customer for this type of technology? Well, traditional broadcast, radio, TV, OB vans, remote trucks, universities doing high quality audio, distance remote learning. That's become an issue as of late. Doing remote auditions, let's say music juries, recitals. Also, schools can broadcast events, graduations, and do all kinds of really interesting things. On the medical side, you can administer remote hearing tests. So during this pandemic, that's certainly a nice ability to have. Houses of worship, recording facilities looking to broadcast to satellite locations or do remote recording or remote webcasting. And also public spaces. You might want to be doing background music from a central location, do announcements, communications, or audio transport and distribution over a LAN or the internet. Now, for those of you that may want to be listening to this presentation, but you cannot stay tethered to a screen the entire time, we are also broadcasting this on our Synthax web radio station, which can be found at synthax.caster.fm. That is Synthax, Synthax .caster, CASTER.fm, and you can simply hit the play button and listen to this presentation there. So let's do a quick IP audio technology overview. So we're going to cover the foundation of what is IP, what is IP audio. We're going to do IP audio and broadcast, talk about compression types, bit rate, compression, latency, and the relationship between them. We're going to cover audio over wide area network using the public internet. We're also going to be doing some technology review of some solutions you're going to want to know about for doing this type of streaming. So first and foremost, let me give you a paradigm or a sort of a snapshot of an environment of broadcast. So we have remote broadcasting, which is what you see here on the left. We have our studio where we can receive those signals. It doesn't have to be a formal studio, but it's basically a central spot in which these signals can be captured, and we can be doing remote full duplex audio between remote and some central location, in this example, a studio. And then we have the program distribution side where we can distribute the signals to many points in many formats at the same time. And you can see in this diagram that there's not a lot of different products that we're talking about, because many of them have the same name. And we're going to cover hardware codec technology. We're going to cover software codec technology. We're going to cover doing software subscription services and how that can help you manage this, as well as doing multicast distribution. So what is IP and RTP? Well, in essence, internet protocol and IP are required for doing this over WAN. And all of the information that we're streaming essentially is in what we call a datagram, which is a self-contained, independent entity of data that carries that information. And an IP protocol essentially establishes an end-to-end communication link over a network. So we're routing data from a source to a destination. And obviously, for any kind of audio or multimedia, we want to have a best effort to deliver the data. But in IP networks, there's no guarantee that all of these packets will arrive, that we won't have packets that are corrupted. There's no guarantee that the packets will be in the proper order, and that maybe some packets will not or may be duplicated. This is due to the many hops that the internet has for the World Wide Web, and we have to deal with this. Also, the concept of an IP address. More and more people are familiar with this term because of home networks and knowing what an IP address is. And the reason I cover it here is because when we get into the conversation about redundancy and redundant streaming, IP address becomes a very critical part of this. You have one IP address per network interface. The network interface is your Ethernet port, or your Wi-Fi connection has an IP address. It can be defined manually or automatically depending on the network, and it is unique. It is not only unique in your house, but your literal internet service provider and your modem, so to speak, has its own public IP address, and it's unique that anywhere in the world. So when we talk about streaming over the internet, we're going to be talking about having redundant ports that have individual IP addresses. So this concept is extremely important to understand. Now, a user datagram protocol, or UDP, was a technology that was developed in 1980, and it was one of the core members of the Internet Protocol Suite, and it's what enabled connections for loss tolerant data, like say Microsoft Remote Desktop. You know, you have lags in that. It isn't perfectly continuous, but it's okay. We live with it. And it's what I would consider a loss tolerant data connection, but it's not suitable for multimedia. Now, the reason I cover these terms and these core things is because when you're setting up a network for audio streaming, you are going to run into these terms, UDP. You're also going to run into a term called RTP, which stands for real-time protocol. This was developed from 1996 to 2003, and it's the IP protocol for delivering audio and video over IP networks. And it typically runs over UDP, very similar to LAN audio, how Dante runs over AES-67. So this protocol is used in doing multimedia. It's certainly advanced over the years. And within this protocol, there are other protocols like RTCP, which is a control protocol, and it carries transmission statistics for quality of service, synchronization of multiple streams, all those kinds of things. It contains sequence numbers so that the decoder that's receiving this information knows exactly what order these packets are and can actually put them back together. And the net result for the listener is that the audio is pristine. There's no dropouts, there's no clicks, there's no pops. So RTP is something you are going to run into. Also, you might run into a term called SIP, or a SIP infrastructure. It stands for Signaling Protocol. The idea of SIP is a signaling protocol. It stands for Session Initiation Protocol, and it's used to establish these connections over a network, especially a wide area network. And it's a very convenient thing because it allows you to not have to worry about what your IP or public IP is. It also has other features depending on the SIP infrastructure for establishing third-party connections between two separate manufacturers. So SIP, RTP, and UDP are terms you will run into in trying to do reliable audio over unreliable networks. Now, IP audio in broadcast and streaming is where we tie this all together. Here's what we know. We know that IP technology is used to carry the information. We know that RTP is a standard protocol. We know that SIP is a typical protocol used to establish these connections, and you will run into these quite often. Factors that are going to affect your audio in doing reliable audio is going to be audio compression and the network bit rate of your actual network. Audio compression is something that is going to adapt your audio to the network that you're using, the network at hand. And the network bit rate is going to determine the number of audio channels, the sample rate, and the type of audio compression that you need to use. And these are parameters as somebody setting up a stream, you're going to need to know and understand. So, why audio compression? Well, we have to adapt the bit rate to fit the audio over IP. We have to limit the size of the data to be transmitted. Sort of think of it like a hose. The fatter the hose, the more water and more pressure we can put in that hose. The thinner the hose, we have to back off the water and the amount and pressure that we use. And that's what audio compression will do. There's two types of audio compression in the audio world. You probably heard these terms before: lossless algorithms and lossy algorithms. In broadcast, we use lossy algorithms because there's a primary advantage that it's a fixed bit rate. And the other weakness related to lossless compression, while the advantage is no loss of audio quality, the weakness is it's not a constant bit rate. There's a low average compression ratio. So it's not really giving us or buying us a lot of space. So the advantage of lossy algorithms gives us multiple compression ratios that are still good for CD audio quality and that we have a fixed bit rate. The weakness that you have to take into consideration is that when we use compression, we add latency, we add time to receive that stream. But that's an acceptable compromise depending on what we're doing. But as we increase compression, so we're trying to adapt to a smaller, slower network, we're going to increase the latency. Now, the typical compressions that you're going to run into when you set up your network are these. There are voice over IP compression algorithms for voice because the voice has a very narrow bandwidth in the audio spectrum, 300 to 3,400 kilohertz. G711 and G722 have been used for years. These are perfectly suitable and they work fine for spoken word. But as soon as we want to do music and more complex audio, we're going to want to use what we call our high quality audio compression algorithms like MP2, MP3, AAC, which comes in various forms, Opus, and aptX. And I'm going to go through these various versions so you just have a working understanding. When audio is represented in the digital domain, we take snapshots, pictures. This is how we sample. So if we have a 44.1 kilohertz sample rate, we're taking 44.1 thousand pictures of that sound in 1 second. And that's what it looks like. And we put it together and we get a wave, a sine wave. Now we can do compression or broadcasting rather without any compression. And that is in the broadcast community, that's known as PCM. So when you see PCM as an option, it means you're choosing not to compress the audio and you're sending it in its original form. But there is a consequence to this because PCM takes up quite a bit of bit rate. You can see raw audio bit rate for a 24-bit 48K, which is kind of our broadcast standard nowadays, is 2.3 megabits per second. We start adding audio channels to that, it's going to take quite a network to accommodate that. So the raw audio bit rate using PCM is going to use way too much space, and it probably isn't going to help us to do lots of different things. So now we get into compression. We're going to start with our first one, MP2. You've probably heard of MP2. It came right before MP3. It had one objective: give us CD-like quality at a bit rate of 256 kilobits per second, which is substantially lower than what PCM was doing. And of course, there's lots of different bit rates that we've probably seen on our MP3 players, 32, 48, 56, etc. Now, MP2 was very quickly replaced by MP3 in 1993. And essentially, MP3 had one objective: give us 128 kilobit bit rate that sounds like 256 kilobit MP2. So essentially, we wanted to increase the quality and take the bit rate and cut it in half, going from 256 to 128. This was first adopted in the consumer market with iPods and consumer music downloading. iTunes was set up, and Napster and all these different sites. And this became essentially our web radio format as well. MP3 is still used to this day, and it's something that everyone who listens and enjoys music is very comfortable and used to. However, while MP3 is a good compression and it's a compromise, it wasn't enough for the broadcast sector. We wanted to have higher quality CD quality audio and get even more fidelity at reasonable bit rates. So several flavors of different audio compressions were invented. In 1997, we wanted to increase the audio quality of MP3 and basically keep the same bit rate of MP3. So several flavors of AAC emerged, and AAC stands for Advanced Audio Compression. You will see these settings on many hardware codecs, and you might even see it in some software codecs. It comes in AAC, LC, HEAAC, AAC-LD, and just goes on and on and on. And each one of these versions is a trade-off between bitrate, audio quality, and latency. And you can see on this graph, and it's a little grainy, my apologies, you basically get CD-like quality at different bit rates, and you have different latencies as a result. I'm going to put up a chart in a minute and sort of compare all of these. Another compression algorithm that you're going to come across is Opus. Now you're going to notice I've said that Opus is royalty free. What that means is manufacturers that incorporate MP2 and MP3 or AAC actually have to pay money to incorporate those technologies in their hardware. And that, of course, gets passed on to the consumer. In the case of Opus, it's widely adopted in many manufacturers' products because they don't have to pay money to use it. It's a royalty-free open source technology. It's a lossy compression that was standardized in 2012, and it's considered adequate from speech to complex audio or music. So you can see right here, we have full band stereo, super wide band, narrow band, different bit rates over here. And Opus kind of can span and work along all of them. This chart is attempting to compare Opus to the various forms of AAC and G711, and on it goes. So to make it a little more understandable, what I did is I put all of these formats in a chart in a thing like this, where you can see PCM, and I'm sorting from fastest to slowest bit rate. So it gives you an idea of the different compression formats that are out there, what the bit rate is, and what the encoder to decoder latency is. Therefore, the conclusion, and it starts to become clear as you absorb this, is that most broadcasters tend to live right where I'm outlining with my mouse, because you're getting anywhere from 50 to 100 milliseconds of encoder to decoder latency, which is perfectly fine. The bit rate is extremely usable and acceptable, and we can add multiple channels of audio before we get into the many megabits per second, which is your typical upload download speeds in a residential internet. So this is a good general reference of the various forms of AAC and Opus, which you're going to see quite a bit of. Now, everything I've been talking about is in the paradigm of online wide area network. What about local area network audio or LAN audio? Well, typically with those types of technologies, you interconnect everything locally with a switch, with Cat5 wire or Cat6 wire, microphones and decoders and encoders and mixers and all kinds of stuff you can get in either Dante or AES in different formats. And I'll cover those in a second. But synchronous audio essentially has one advantage over asynchronous audio, which is what we do over the internet. And that is everything is pretty much clocked and synchronous using a precision time protocol. So whether we're talking AS67 or proprietary technologies like Dante or QLAN or some things you may have heard of, these technologies include synchronization of the audio itself. They include management of routing devices and discovering devices, etc. But they're proprietary and they only work on a local area network. When we get out into a wide area network like the internet, we go to an asynchronous scenario, and that's where these codecs come into play, and we need encoding and decoding, and the internet using the RTP, as I explained earlier, is carrying that information. So that's what we're doing here. So when we went through who the customers are, it's because these folks want to use the internet as the carrying mechanism to carry their audio, doing all the different things that we outlined earlier. So doing audio over a wide area network, we could be talking point to point, one destination, one source, or we could be talking point to many points using the public internet as our wiring. Now, there's no quality of service in most cases because it's the public internet. So there's no guaranteed bit rate. There's limited available bit rate depending on how you're connected to the web, whether you're using Wi-Fi or not. packets are lost, packets are duplicated, they become disordered, and there's jitter. There's actually jitter between the encoder and the decoder, and there can be clock drift as well. So if you're sampling at 48, you might receive it at 48 point something. So you're not at exact pitch. So all of the challenges that need to be solved for reliable audio are receiving the packets, managing them, managing late packets, managing clock drift, and doing high quality audio with a limited network bitrate. So Digigram, a company out of France, invented a technology back in 2009 called Fluid IP. It's an engine, it's the backbone of their technology that's built into every unit that they manufacture. And it basically is a smart IP streaming engine that guarantees quality of service when you're using it. And it deals with all of those challenges to be solved. So we have the highest possible quality, we have excellent stability, we have redundant streaming, which we're going to talk about, and we can do it at a very low latency. But again, the latency is going to be determined by the bit rate we're using, which in some cases is out of our control, and the compression algorithm that we have to utilize to do the streaming itself, which I covered in a previous slide. So there are several manufacturers out there that manufacture hardware and provide software codecs for audio transmission. So what makes Digigram's Fluid IP unique? There's really three things that you need to know. Number one, and this is why we cover the compression subject in a little bit of detail. Digigram's Fluid IP is the most adaptable solution on the market because all the compression formats come standard. Compressions for voice, compressions for high quality audio. There's no gotchas. There's no add-on software charges later on or after the fact. When you're deploying your solution, you can adapt your solution from Digigram to whatever bit rate you have with a network that you're using for the job. So that is a very huge benefit. Number two that makes them different is how they've used and implemented an idea called forward error correction. This is essentially taking the original source represented as packets and duplicating them on purpose and sending them down the pipe. And you actually have the ability to dial in how much forward error correction you want to use. Forward error correction is great to solve a problem, but you don't want to use it haphazardly because there are consequences to using forward error correction. When you add error correction, you're telling the decoder to take the time to decode those extra packets of information to reconstruct the original stream without any glitches. So it's going to take more time, and it's obviously going to raise the IP bit rate because you're putting more pressure on the network. So you want to minimize the amount of forward error correction you use unless it's absolutely necessary. So that's number two. The number three thing, and probably the biggest difference that Digigram provides versus other solutions out there, is how to do what we call dual redundant streaming. And I call it true 100% dual streaming because it's an idea known as spatial diversity. We're actually using two different IP network paths to the destination. So we have stream A and stream B. Our hardware literally has more than one IP address because there's more than one network interface, and you can literally use a different internet service provider if you so choose. And your stream actually takes a completely different path over the internet to the receiver. In addition to spatial diversity, we have time diversity. And what that essentially means is we can delay the duplicate stream, we can offset it. So if there's a catastrophic internet event in time, because of this offset, the duplicate stream won't be affected on the same packet that maybe was affected on the original stream, which means the decoder has the opportunity to reconstruct the entire stream without any issue, without any glitch, for high quality professional audio, which is what we want. So those are the three differences in what makes Fluid IP different. Obviously, other things have to be incorporated. Many manufacturers incorporate some kind of buffering for the jitter so that all the packets don't have irregular delays. And they also have to deal with clock drift. And because of the RTCP that I mentioned earlier, we can put the clock information in the stream so the decoder knows that, yes, this was a 48 kilohertz sample rate signal, so we don't decode it at a slightly different sample rate. So these are all the things that get incorporated for doing what we call reliable pro audio over unreliable networks. So here's a picture that sort of shows this. Let's say we have a station or something going on over here, and we have something going on in a different location anywhere in the world. We have a Digigram Fluid IP solution box here, and we have one here. They're connected over the internet. There's a dual redundant stream. The local audio, whatever it happens to be, could be analog, could be digital, could be AOIP, some form of audio over IP like Ravenna, Livewire, Dante, or whatever. And that audio goes in, it's sent, it's received, it's decoded, and comes back out in whatever local audio format we want. All the packets are received, disordered packets are reordered, late packets are managed, clock drift is corrected, and high audio quality is maintained no matter how unreliable the network. Now, another way to show it is maybe a multi-campus scenario. So here we're showing a house of worship situation. Let's say that house of worship, the main campus is here. Let's say the main campus is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and they have campuses in Tampa and Orlando, and they're doing a Dante network in their local campus. And they want to take not only a stereo mix of the service, but they literally want to take every audio channel that's discrete, including intercom and IFB, and send it to the other campuses. And not only can they send up to 128 discrete channels synchronously, because we can encapsulate that signal into a single stream, but we can actually send audio back. So we can actually have a two-way full duplex situation. And then that audio can be received, output in MADI, analog, Dante, doesn't matter. We obviously choose the appropriate output device that we want. And that audio can be remixed in Orlando and remixed again in Tampa. So it's just another way to illustrate how this technology could be used. A different way might be connecting to venues. Let's say you have Madison Square Garden in New York, Staples Center in Los Angeles. For the sake of this slide, let's say both venues are using Dante, and we want to interconnect the venues and make them one whole audio system. We can put an Akoya ServLink on each end, connect it over the internet, and in full duplex transfer up to 64 channels of Dante from Los Angeles to New York and vice versa. So there's just some different ways this technology can be used. So what are the solutions? What are these boxes called? They're called Akoya. That's how you pronounced it. Crosslink and Akoya ServLink. They come in several different flavors, but at the end of the day, they all have the Fluid IP engine. You have basically your local audio and your codec number in each one. That's the only difference between the different units. The units on the top are your stereo or dual stereo units, typically found in radio or more simple installations where we're just looking to take a stereo signal and stream it somewhere, receive it, decode it kind of situation. So radio is a typical use for that. Down at the bottom, we have multi-channel codecs, and specifically the ServLink is pretty popular because the ServLink can do such a high density of audio channels up to 128. And I say up to because the ServLink has a unique feature. It's completely user scalable. It starts off as 4 stereo codecs. You can get into the ServLink with analog, AES, MADI, Dante, depending on which version of the ServLink you have. But you might later on decide you need more than 4 stereo or 8 mono connections. You might want to expand it to 16, 24, 32, all the way up to 128, which means it's completely user scalable later on. So you don't have to know your final number of codecs that you need today. You can start off with a base model and update with nothing but software and firmware updates that you can do in the field. And there's nothing left to install. You don't have to go into any equipment room. You don't have to make room for more racks, which means when you're doing 128 or more accurately 64 stereo programs, I don't have 64 boxes all connected to power, drawing current and power throughout the year and needing to cool them in a room, which can cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars each and every year. So it's a huge savings. So Akoya technology has been around for years. It's been well over 10 years. It was developed in 2009. There's well over 10,000 codecs in operation worldwide every day, 24/7. This is not an exhaustive list of companies that you might be familiar with that use the technology, but you're in very good company with using Akoya. From Apple to NBC to BBC to some very major companies. Now, these boxes are ST2110 compatible. They support all of the very common pro audio formats. So you're going to be in good shape no matter which direction you go with a digigram solution. Now, most audio engineers like to see the back panel. This is what a typical back panel looks like. This particular unit is the Akoya Crosslink Dual. You'll notice first and foremost, we have redundant power supplies. You'll notice that we have not just two, but four ports. Two of them are your local area network or LAN ports for your AOIP, because you can have primary and secondary AES67, for example. But you also have two wide area network or WAN ports for the internet. And that goes back to the each port is its unique IP address for the internet. So that's how we're able to do true redundant streaming. We also can serially transmit RS-232 data and GPIOs. We also can synchronize units together. So with our ServLink, for example, we can actually connect one ServLink to another, and the second unit is full redundant. So if the first one goes down, the second one takes over with no delay. And of course, the obvious connections for audio, analog, ASCBU. On this particular model, analog, ASCBU. We can do Ravenna and Livewire and AS67. And then we have a second set of I/O ports on the multi-pin connector, because as I said earlier, this is the dual unit. So it's got four audio inputs and outputs in all those different forms. Now, the ServLink I mentioned several times is scalable, meaning that you can go from 8 to 128 channels, and depending on the number of IOs and the type of IOs that you want, that is going to determine your IO upgrade. And of course, it comes in several different versions. And I'm going to show you a short video of kind of that church application, just to kind of open your minds as to what's possible. So as you can see, it's a very powerful, capable box. And again, comes in lots of different flavors, and you have different IO capabilities depending on which connectivity you go with. Obviously, when we get into the Maddie, Dante, AS, etc., we can go all the way up to 128 channels. When we do the AS EBU version, we can go up to 32. And then with analog, we can go up to 16. So, and then of course our RS-232 and GPIO numbers change depending on which unit we have. Now, I usually like to put up this slide again after showing, hey, we're doing a ServLink, we're doing all these channels, and what that is going to mean to the bit rate. And as you can see, if we're using the kinds of compression algorithms I mentioned earlier, you basically take this bit rate, and this represents stereo. So if you're talking, 8 stereo channels for 16, you just take this number and multiply times 16, and that's the bit rate you are using to do it. So even residential internet, like 50 or 150 upload download megabits per second, should be perfectly doable. What about security? If we're putting a serve link or a cross link in a situation using LAN audio and we have other network activity, how do we protect it? Because we're opening up the firewall, we're opening up the network to the internet. So the audio codec lives out. Typical IT design might look something like this, where the audio codec is behind the first DMZ layer of the firewall. Back here, you have trusted and privileged information. That's your regular business activity. Now, if we're doing analog or AS digital format audio, not a big deal because we're not really able to get back behind these firewalls. But when we enable AOIP technology like Dante or AS67, which of course is going to be like Ravenna Livewire, we have to stick the codec a little bit further into the network so that we can access both the local area network as well as the internet. And the audio codec can become a vulnerability spot in this situation. So what Fluid IP did, or Digigram did with their Fluid IP design, is the Ethernet ports responsible for the internet and the Ethernet ports responsible for the local network are not connected. Only a PCI bus internally connects to two worlds, so you can't hack it through IP. So it makes it extremely secure for that type of situation. All right. So up to now, we've talked about hardware codecs relating to rack mount units for either distribution or remote broadcasting, say in a truck. But what about a true portable codec? I want to share with you a codec called the Akoya Talk. So as you can see, the Akoya Talk is an all-in-one solution. It's kind of like a cell phone, a mixer, and a hardware codec all in one box. And as you saw in the video, it's very powerful in how it can be utilized. Now, a typical scenario looks like this, where you have a portable out in the field. You're connected to a studio codec of some kind. Akoya Connect is a SIP infrastructure. That's that word I mentioned earlier that actually comes with your hardware codec with Digigram. And that Akoya Connect connection over the web allows you to do a couple things. Number one, it allows you to connect to your studio codec without having to worry too much about what your public IP address is. If you pop in a SIM card in your unit and connect via cellular, you don't always know your public IP. So we register the Akoya Talk on the Akoya Connect SIP, which is a very simple thing to do. And we register our studio codec, whether it's a Digigram unit or some other manufacturer. And now with something that almost looks like an email address, I can put in a contact here and call this unit with literally hitting a button. And now we have a high quality two-way communication on the program. And then we also have a completely separate stream for talkback. So we can do talkback on the talkback side. We can do mono for talkback one on the left channel and talkback two on the right channel, and then run stereo, or we can run mono on the program side. Very powerful. Now, as you saw in the video, it includes everything. Again, no gotchas. You have the 4G connections. You can bond the cellular. You can set up the cellular to be primary and secondary. You have Wi-Fi, and you have dual Ethernet ports. So again, you can do redundant streaming from the Ethernet ports. You can do redundant streaming from one Ethernet on the primary and the 4G on the backup. So you have a lot of flexibility with the Akoya Talk. The other thing about the Akoya Talk that was briefly covered in the video is that you have onboard recording, you have onboard smartphone navigation. It's like using a smartphone. And the mixer is very tactile, easy to use, everything you would expect to have for this type of job. The unit comes with one lithium ion battery. You can see that compartment here on the right. And then on the opposite side, there's another compartment for the second battery. So you can actually get 12 hours of battery life out of the unit. And the Koya Talk also comes with a power supply. So we can actually connect it to power. So you almost have triple redundant power supply, and you have all the redundancy with the streaming. You can record internally to the 64 gigabyte internal hard drive. You can record while streaming. You can record off air and play the recording on air. You can use this for podcasting. Lots of different ways this box can be utilized. And on the back panel, all the connectivity you would expect. Your SIM cards go in here. It's a dual platter. It pulls out. So you can literally have two T-Mobile SIM cards or a T-Mobile and a Verizon SIM card. You have dual antennas for the first SIM card and another set of powered antennas for the second. You have USB-C to access the hard drive. You can even keep your cell phone charged while you're broadcasting. There's your dual Ethernet ports, your analog and or AES EBU IO is here as well. So you have an external auxiliary input. So you can add a mixer, and you even have the ability to serially transmit GPIOs. So there really isn't anything that wasn't thought of for this unit. It's all standard, all comes with it. The only option for the Akoya Talk really is a second battery or the backpack or carry case that you saw in the video. Also, I've mentioned a couple times, but it's important to note that we can not only connect to third-party codecs, but I could connect to two separate manufacturer codecs simultaneously, which means if I had, say, a Digigram hardware codec and a Comrex codec, I could literally set up the program side to talk to one of these, and I could have the talkback side connect to another one. Very, very powerful. So all of the hardware codecs, really three: Akoya Crosslink, Akoya ServeLink, and Akoya Talk. Now, most recently, Digigram introduced their software or cloud solutions, and they are called Akoya Connect, Akoya Guest, and Akoya Mobile. Now, Akoya Mobile and Akoya Guest are like web codecs to connect remotely with nothing but a smartphone or a web browser. And Akoya Connect is the actual infrastructure or SIP infrastructure I spoke about earlier. So this is where they sit in the ecosystem. Akoya Connect is all your blue lines, all your blue dotted lines. It's the SIP infrastructure that Digigram provides at no extra charge for your codec. When you buy a hardware codec, and I want to be clear about this, you get two SIP connections at no charge. You don't have to pay for them. The basic SIP connection allows you to do your registration of your codecs, not have to worry about knowing the IP addresses. And also it allows third-party interoperability. So right out of the box, I can take an Akoya Talk and use it with any radio facilities equipment. All I have to do is register their equipment on Akoya Connect. It takes maybe 5 minutes. The actual process of registration does not interfere with the workflow of that station in any way. That equipment, however it's being used currently, doesn't change. All you do is a one-time setup, and now that equipment can actually be in a standby state to receive a call from whatever it was receiving calls from before, or receive calls from the Digigram, which means if you're in a situation, either you work for a station or you're working for a company that is an integration or reseller, you can use the digigram solutions with other manufacturers. Very, very important. Also, there's something called Akoya Connect Manage and Monitor and Remote. And I'm going to talk about those on the next slide, because these are subscription services that you can subscribe to if you have more enterprise level installations where you want that level of monitoring, remote control, and management. And the remote control feature is an extremely unique feature because it allows you to, from a single point anywhere on the internet, to connect to the entire infrastructure remotely and control these boxes as if you're the operator, which means people in the field, the journalists, the sports commentators, do not have to be technical. You can actually take ownership and control of Akoya Talk, for example, using Akoya Connect Remote. Now, Akoya Mobile and Akoya Guest probably isn't too hard to deduce what these are. Akoya Mobile is an app version of Digigram's codec that you can download. It'll be available later this year that you can download for Android or iOS devices, and it turns your smartphone into a codec that can broadcast in to not only Digigram solutions, but third-party solutions, because this app runs on Akoya Connect. So if you want to use Akoya Mobile along with Akoya Connect to connect your cell phones in the field to an existing infrastructure, as long as that existing infrastructure is SIP compatible, we can register it on Akoya Connect, and Akoya Mobile and Akoya Guest can be used. So that makes it very powerful. I don't care if this is an intercom system or an audio codec for broadcast or anything in between. If it is SIP compatible, we can register it and use Akoya Mobile with that device. Akoya Guest is a web codec. Another way to put it is it basically is a link that you put in your web browser. That link would be given to you by the studio and is tied to a particular channel of your hardware codec, for example. And the user does not have to install anything, be technical in any way. All they have to do is put the link in their browser, go to the link, all of the software downloads into their browser and turns their web browser into a high quality 2-channel full duplex codec with even some cool mixer features. You could run an entire radio program and show from a web browser. And I'll actually give you an example of such a facility that's doing that now in New York. So Akoya Connect, Akoya Guest, and Mobile, these are all new and available. The only exception to that statement is Akoya Mobile is coming out slightly later this year. Akoya Connect Manage, Monitor, and Remote are software as a service solutions that for a nominal annual or monthly fee, you can subscribe to, much the same way you subscribe to Microsoft Office or Adobe applications. You can run you can run Akoya Connect from a laptop or any computer connected to the internet. And it looks something like this, where you can see your codecs, you can determine your quality of service, you can see your metrics, you can initiate and cancel calls. And depending on the level of Akoya Connect service you subscribe to, you can monitor, manage, or remote control your codecs. Sorry, a little glitch there. All right. Now let's talk about Akoya Guest. Akoya Guest is the web codec, and the web codec lives right here. That is where it lives in our ecosystem. It is nothing but a link. And as I said earlier, you put the link in the browser, it downloads the software into your browser, and you're off to the races. Now, I told you one such studio that uses Akoya Guest, DNR Studios in New York, literally from their laptop, they have Akoya Guest. They can run an entire show. It could be a live show, a radio. It could be a podcast. You also can use Akoya Guest to bring in remote people to be guests on your show. Very, very powerful. This is what it looks like. Over here, this is our web browser. We have a call button, a mute button, a mixer, and some streaming options. The mixer gives you 3 channels. One channel can be your microphone, which is not only could be the internal microphone or Bluetooth or headset mic, but it also can be set to be your audio interface. And therefore, whatever your audio interface is doing, which could include managing any desktop audio, can all be a source on the microphone channel. Then you have 2 other channels that almost, I sort of think of them as a cart machine. I can load MP3 WAV or M4A files in and play those files and queue things up. Could be spots, music, whatever. I can monitor them in my headphones. I can loop them, and I can, of course, queue them up and control the level. Now, Akoya Guest comes basically it's software, as I said earlier, and you can use it in 3 different ways. You can use it as a one-on-one connection for $49 a month or whatever that comes to annually, like $5.95 a year. You can cancel anytime. So I can do a web browser to web browser connection, which means you could have a Koya guest on your end. I can have a Koya guest on my end. We call each other like a Skype call. One browser rings like a phone, you answer, and now you have a high quality connection, full duplex between the two of you. Now you add an audio interface and other things to this equation, it gets even better. We also can do a Koya guest to a digigram hardware codec. So a Koya guest in the field calls in, is connected to channels 1 and 2 of my crosslink or servlink, for example. We also, because we're using a Koya Connect, we can use a Koya guest with any third-party codec, which means if you're a facility, a radio facility or a broadcast facility, or you work on the design build side of our industry and you're working with clients that already have codecs in use or intercom products in use, if they can be SIP, if they are SIP compatible, we can register them on a Koya Connect and use a Koya Guest or a Koya Mobile with these products. Now, all of this sort of represents a simple two-way communication. We also can do multiple guests at once. When we do that, we no longer can do web browser to web browser. We have to introduce hardware at one end. So in this example, we have either a crosslink or a third-party codec in the studio, and then the first Akoya guest connection is coming in on the first 2 channels, for example, and maybe the second person is coming in on the second 2 channels, and then that's being mixed here. But it gets even more interesting when we add a serve link, because now with a serve link, we can get up to quite a few guests at once. And because of this fact, we can now go to other applications like remote translation, distance learning for schools, universities, virtual trade shows where you have panelists that are going to be contributing high quality audio to the meeting. A Koya guest becomes extremely valuable in all of these different scenarios. And while it says 8 to 64 guests at once, that would be stereo. We can do mono and double that number. We can add multiple boxes at this end to get even more things going on. So it might look something like this in a typical remote to studio guest setup. Each one of these people have a unique Akoya guest link that comes into a specific channel of the serve link and that is managed and dealt with here. So I would like to do a little demonstration of what this looks like and how it feels as a user of Akoya guest. Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to show you how fast and easy it is to use Akoya guest. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our Akoya guest link that's been provided. We will get a green call button, which means we're ready to make the call. We have a mute button, mixer, and settings. I'm going to go stereo with the best quality setting. I'm going to elect not to use any DSP. I will activate my mixer, use my audio device that's connected, load some music files. Get a good mix. We can listen to our files and we can turn broadcasts on and off. We will be broadcasting, so we'll have all those on. You can see my mic. Set a level of my music. Do the same down here. Okay, once I'm ready to go, I can cue up my music to wherever I want, make the call. We're now connected and we're broadcasting. If I want to hear my microphone in my headphones, I can simply hit the listen button, start the music, and then control the mix in real time as we broadcast. If we want to loop music, we can do that, play our other piece. And it's that simple. Thanks for watching. All right. The last piece of the remote broadcasting puzzle is Akoya Mobile, using it on a smartphone, using Akoya Connect back to the studio. And again, this can be used with not only digigram solutions, but third party, and that's possible due to the Akoya Connect. Now, in this picture, she's holding a little preamp in her left hand called a Q mic, which allows you to use a higher quality microphone and or headset, because it will allow both, by simply using the TRS mini jack of your cell phone. And yes, it'll even work with an iPhone with that little dongle that they provide for the lightning jack. What it looks like is something like this. It does have onboard recording as well using the internal hard drive, but it has a typical connection for transmitting, doing interviews, uh, remote recording, remote uh, connection at all times, just using the smartphone and whatever the 4 or 5G connection is. Also, the Q mic looks like this. It's a passive design. There's no battery. And again, it's compatible with all the latest smartphones and gives you gain levels from, plus 4 dB, 24 dB, plus 7, even minus 11 dB in line level. So you can connect virtually anything you would need, just not a condenser mic in the field. So the one IP solution on the remote side, I sort of covered. Now you can kind of see the whole picture. Akoya Talk, Akoya Mobile with the Q mic, you could even use a crosslink in the field, or ServLink for that matter, or Akoya Guest. And then of course we're receiving here. So what are some of the applications? What are some of the things we can do with this technology? Now, a couple of times I've shared this graphic where you have the remote broadcasting side, you have the studio receiving, and then on the right side of the diagram, you have program distribution, where probably one of the most popular and most sought out applications is web radio. How can I just do a simple web radio stream that's very high quality? And as I said at the beginning of this broadcast, we are doing web radio right now. If you go to synthax.caster.fm, you can actually listen to the audio portion of this presentation, and it's a very high quality audio that you're not going to get on social media or Zoom, for example. But this is a very inexpensive, powerful way to create a web radio solution for your customer. Or if you are the customer looking for such a solution, you can get a simple Koya crosslink and put audio right into it and broadcast to the unlimited audience. Very powerful. So this is obviously sort of a radio application, but there's other things that we can do with this technology. Obviously, during this pandemic, a lot of broadcasters come home. People are trying to do broadcasting remotely on a Koya Talk in the living room, back to a crosslink or a third-party codec. Certainly easy solution. Doing traditional broadcast where we're going from a studio to a transmitter site. We have hardware codecs at each end. We have dual redundant streaming shown with this diagram. Depending on our local audio connections, not a problem. Even if the studio is outside the radius of the transmitter, we can have a receiver here picking up the transmission over the airwaves, going audio back through this way so the studio can confidence monitor the radio station. We can connect facilities, campuses very easily, and depending on the number of audio channels and all of the different factors that go into this, the bit rate, the compression, anything is possible. We shared with you earlier connecting venues. You might want to take audio from one venue and remix it into another. We can do terrestrial broadcasting. We can intermix different types of broadcasting from satellite microwave connections, redundant connections. We can go do several stations out of the same facility. We can take transmissions off of satellite and then transcode it into another format out to web radio, for example. We can do terrestrial web radio very easily. If we're doing working with one client that wanted to simultaneously broadcast multiple things from the university on different web radio stations. So maybe the music department is broadcasting recitals so mom and dad can listen who don't live in state, but we're also broadcasting a basketball game going on at the same time. So all of that is very possible with the Digigram technology. So hopefully this has been insightful. But not only radio has use for this technology, we have a lot of musicians who are stuck at home and can't play live and give a very high quality professional audio product to their audience. With something simple like an Akoya Crosslink LE, I can take my audio out of my mixer or my sound card and go out to the masses and do a very high quality Sirius XM radio quality broadcast, which is going to be far and away better sounding than any other means to do it. We covered the church application and doing multi-campus streaming. We also touched on doing university distance learning applications with Akoya Guest. You might have students at home can all connect on Zoom with the video and the screen sharing, elect not to do connection through the Zoom audio, and then connect with Akoya Guest. And then we can do Dante and connect that to classrooms and recital halls, and even introduce an RME product and do the mix minus necessary. We also can do Maddie and have standalone solutions. Music schools, one-on-one teaching. This is a great solution. Um, the lectures, and probably even be able to go to hundreds of people at one time. Web radio is another way to do that, or do a virtual graduation, let's say. You can even combine your web radio distribution side with your remote broadcasting side. So let's say I'm doing a virtual trade show. I have 4 or 5 panelists on my panel that are going to contribute high quality audio to the discussion, multimedia, music files, whatever that's coming in. And then I can broadcast out to a World Wide Web audience of unlimited listeners, and they can all be listening at a high quality. And then I can also be simultaneously broadcasting on YouTube, Facebook Live, etc. So I'm giving my audience options for a high quality feed. Campus broadcasting is becoming a thing. So not only do we want to do distance learning, but what about being able to also broadcast sporting events and have sports commentary for football and baseball and basketball all at the same time. So the ServeLink, because it's multi-channel, can receive signals from various points around campus and be simultaneously broadcasting. If I put a ServeLink over here, I could be broadcasting the game on one channel. I could be broadcasting a recital on a different channel. I could be broadcasting a class on another channel. Very powerful way to go. Remote translation, like United Nations in Europe, uses this solution where I can use a ServeLink connected to the network on the conference audio, have people remotely listen to the actual meeting, and then in real time translate in another language. And those translations can be simultaneously broadcast to other on different web radio channels to listen to their meeting in the appropriate language. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for your time today. I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them to me. My email is right here, derek@synthax.com. And I really appreciate everybody's time and attention, and have a wonderful day.